What's important to me is that I think people understand is that our planet is one that's filled with such fear. We have fear of everything. And this is a focal point for fear. When you're dealing with someone coming in through your walls and taking you out of your bedroom to a strange spacecraft and doing things to your body, it makes you want to go inside and to understand, what is this place? Who are we? Why are we here? What is this happening? Why do some people see the spaceship and others don't? I don't know why. I really think it has to do with us going inside and saying that there's something more going in here than what meets the eye. And we have to go inside ourselves to understand what's going on. There's a self-exploration here that opens one, that will open up one to other dimensions, other realities, and other possibilities. This place is not about money markets, picket fence, getting a car, and getting the best job. There's a lot more going on here than meets the eye.
People have often asked me, how come there are so few people of color who have encounters? And I kind of always shake my head. I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course, people of color have encounters. In fact, in all my books in which I feature close encounters, there's always been people of many different races: Asian, Latino, black, white, you name it. So I have to say, people of all races do have encounters. And this particular case involves Pat Brown, who is of African American ancestry. At the time, this was the mid 1980s, Pat worked as a telephone operator and lived in a condominium complex in a crowded suburb outside of Los Angeles. And she had no interest in the paranormal, no interest in UFOs, was kind of skeptical of them actually. She lived a normal life. A few years earlier, her friend Denise, that is a pseudonym, moved to Prescott, Arizona, and Denise kept asking Pat to come and visit. Denise particularly wanted Pat to come see what she called walk-ins. These are psychic channelers who claim to channel extraterrestrials. Pat had no interest in this, but Denise kept on asking, and so finally Pat relented and agreed to come visit her friend Denise in Prescott, and together they would go see these people who channel extraterrestrials. So in 1988, that's what Pat did. She drove down to Prescott and stayed in Denise's home. And it was around the same time that she saw the channelers. She's not sure if it was before or after, but she had a very strange experience. She woke up one evening in Denise's home and saw these glowing light beings come through the wall and into her bedroom. As Pat says, I was lying in bed and I had my back to the wall when I saw these two aliens off towards the back of my head. I saw them come through the wall and they came up to me. They were slender, iridescent, like a whitish color. I didn't try to move, I just lay there. They came over and they went to the top of my head, and it felt very good, so I allowed it. Following this, Pat didn't think much of the experience. It wasn't traumatic, wasn't scary, but she really wasn't quite sure what to make of it. But following this, they went to go see the walk-ins, and one of these guys was channeling, and Pat was talking to the alien through the channeler, and asked the channeler, the ET, do you have a ship? Do you have a craft? And the ET replied, yes. And Pat said, I want to go on your ship. And the ET replied, oh, really, you do? And Pat said, yes, I'm very curious to see what it would look like to be on your ship. And the channeler agreed. And that was really the extent of the conversation. And following this visit to the channeler, Pat returned to her home in Southern California. It was 3 days later, Pat had a very lucid dream that she was on board a UFO. She remembers being laid out on a table and this soothing yellow light shone down on her, and it was a very pleasant feeling, and she fell asleep. It was somewhat a dreamlike experience, but at the same time, it felt very real, particularly because she could feel a sensation, a very soothing and comforting sensation coming from this yellow light. So she thought that perhaps this was more than a dream, but she couldn't be sure. Interestingly, around this time, she decided she's going to quit her job, which was kind of a stifling position and not her true passion. She quit her job as a telephone operator and instead became a healing massage therapist and lived a normal life for at least a couple of years more. But this all changed on Christmas Eve, 1992. On that evening, Pat was asleep in her bedroom in her condominium complex when she woke up to find her bed surrounded by gray-type ETs. She was fully conscious, and this terrified her. She was very scared. They shone a beam of light down on her, paralyzing her, pulled her up through the wall, and the next thing she knows, she's on a craft. She's laying down on this table. It's got a kind of bronze color to it. There are weird panels all around her, shelves with weird instruments on them, and there's two grays, one on either side of her. There's a female gray on one side and what she perceives to be a male gray on the other side. The female gray is holding Pat down, holding her, has a hand on her head and on her chest, and is repeating over and over again, don't be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. She kept repeating it over and over again. You're fine. I'm not going to hurt you. But Pat was in a complete panic. As Pat says, I was fighting her like crazy. I put my finger in her mouth, the little thing that was her mouth, and I was trying to rip it out of her face. I was just going crazy. And at that point, the male gray on the other side said, boy, she's different tonight. And that kind of freaked Pat out, like different tonight. Had she been on board before? So she was really freaking out, and that's all she really remembers. She does remember that the atmosphere, the air on the ship was very strange, not quite like Earth normal. It was very cool, she says, very thin and almost silky in texture. So that was strange. But following this experience, she woke up back in her bedroom, immediately jumped up, grabbed the phone, and called her friend Denise and said, you will never guess where I have just been. Pat is absolutely certain this wasn't a dream. She was awake the whole time. And this is how her experiences really began in earnest. And following this one visitation, the ETs came again and again, over and over, for the next 30 days. They would come 3 days in a row, then not come for 4 or 5 days, and then come another 3 days in a row. And it was always the same. Pat would wake up to find her bed surrounded by these grays, and they would say, I'm not going to hurt you. We're not going to hurt you. We're just here to talk to you and to help you. But it caused Pat a lot of fear. They would always shine this beam of light down on her, paralyze her, and she'd float up through the wall and pass out and wake up some hours later back in her bedroom. So yeah, this was not a good experience for her. She didn't like it at all, and just kept going on and on for at least a month. And that wasn't the only strange thing that happened. Another weird thing that happened was she saw this apparition. As Pat says, it was just this big green thing. It didn't have any definite form, just this big green blob. It was solid, kind of like a dirty chartreuse green. It was very large. She saw it first in her den and another time in her living room. She has no idea what it was, but it was definitely very strange. Another strange thing that happened was one day she came home from work to find that the interior of her condo stank real bad, like dirty garbage, dirty rotting garbage. As Pat says, it was an awful, awful smell, but I perceived that they had been there, that was their odor. I have heard this described from other people who described a sort of sulfur-like odor. So perhaps Pat's intuition was correct. At any rate, after 30 days had passed, Pat was at the end of her rope. She couldn't take this anymore. These grays just kept coming and coming, and one evening she kind of knew they were going to be coming. It had been a few days. So she was crying, and she said out loud, thinking to them, "This is far too big for me to handle." At that point, something very interesting happened. She heard a voice telepathically in her head saying, "Here is a ball of golden light for you. This is for your healing. As long as you need it, it's going to be here for you to use. You're on the yellow ray of healing now. When you're ready for the purple ray, we'll be back." So she saw this ball of yellow light, and following this experience could see it in her mind's eye, and it stayed with her. And for the next 4 days or so, Pat just remained at home and did a lot of nurturing activities and worked with this ball of light, this really soothing yellow energy, which she said felt very, very healing, and it reduced her fear to a huge degree. And this is when her encounters made a dramatic shift from being very scary to becoming extremely spiritual.